What's up, everybody, and welcome to the 10-7 MMA Show. My name is Huzefa. I'm one of the co-creators of this channel, along with Justin James, a professional mixed martial artist. And this is our first video, and in this video, I've been wanting to make this video for the longest time. We finally created a YouTube channel that we can talk about MMA, which is my favorite sport, but this is the 10 reasons why MMA is the best sport on the planet. Like I said, I had this idea, I've been wanting to communicate it for so long. For people who are already big fans of the sport and have been longtime fans, as well as for people who might be interested in the sport or are considering checking it out, these are 10 amazing reasons why you should check it out, why you should dive into it, and why it's amazing for anybody out there who's striving for their own personal self-development goals. So without further ado, let's do it. So the first reason is that MMA is the culmination of a science experiment that unearthed the most effective forms of combat. So if you just think about the inception of the sport and the development, it's so amazingly fascinating and cool. If you remember back in the day, we got the DVDs from the 1990s when we were in college. This is back in 2000, of these UFC fights of Tank Abbott and Vitor Belfort having these crazy battles and these big guys with different fighting styles, and it's like you just don't know what's going to happen. Now back then I thought it was even more interesting at first because there were essentially almost no rules. I think you couldn't eye gouge, you couldn't fish hook, but for the most part anything went, and you got to see how different forms really kind of stood up to each other. Is karate the best? Is it Muay Thai? And through this process we have determined, and I studied Taekwondo when I was a kid. Obviously now I train in Muay Thai, but you learn through that process, wait, the real striking, the most effective striking form is probably Muay Thai. We learned the effectiveness of jiu-jitsu. We learned how effective wrestling is, and then now we have this incredible infusion of Sambo from Russia with all these incredible fighters out there. So it's continually evolving, but it really showed, I think, even at the beginning, hey, this is what works and this is what doesn't. And by the way, this information is important for anybody who's trying to lead a safe life. You should all know how to take care of yourself in a dangerous situation. So this is not only fascinating for the sport, but fascinating for people in general. All right, number two, it is the ultimate and most conclusive form of competition. So I've heard Joe Rogan talk about this, and we're gonna talk about Joe Rogan shortly, but he has mentioned this idea, and I always thought it rang so true. It's like, no matter what competition you might have with somebody, whether you're running a race or you're playing a game of chess or something like that, I think that a lot of times in that competitive spirit, you'd be like, all right, well, you beat me there, but I could beat you up, I could take you down, whatever. And so when you look at a mixed martial arts fight, which is as close as you're gonna get to just a pure fight. Now there's rounds and there's certain rules, but it's still pretty much a pure fight. There's really nothing to be said after you beat somebody in a fight. If you can best them in that competition, there's no, well, okay, you beat me there, but I could beat you in a game of chess or this and that. It's the ultimate final ending point of, hey, we're gonna go head to head at the purest form of competition and see who emerges victorious. So to me, that makes it such a fascinating and such an incredibly powerful form of competition. So there you go. Reason number three, it involves three professionals that I deeply admire: Joe Rogan, Dana White, and Ariel Helwani. And I want to talk about each of these individuals and why I admire them. By the way, when I'm talking about MMA, I am mostly talking in this video about the UFC. That's the primary organization that I love, that I'm a fan of, so I just want to give that caveat. I've always been a big fan of Joe Rogan and his podcast. I feel like he is on an honest journey to try and figure out the truth of this world and just understand life in general. He asks really fascinating questions, and the fact that he is such a mainstay in this sport, I think, just makes it that much more exciting and interesting, because he'll even have fighters on to get a deeper dive into their psyche, into their mindsets. Moreover, I love whenever he is commentating. I think his commentating is amazing, and I think he just always does it authentically. None of those fake broadcasting voices or anything like that. No offense to people who do use that stuff, but he's just a straight shooter through and through. I love his involvement in the sport, and I also admire him from the standpoint of he does what he finds exciting. He creates things that give him a spark, that bring him to life, and I try to follow the same thing in my professional life as well. Now, number two, Dana White. I know he's mired in some controversy. This is not about his personal life, this is about his professional journey. And if you think what he's done, he has taken a sport that was nobody really wanted. Nobody wanted it on TV. They thought it was too dangerous, they thought it was too violent, and he created this amazing product by adding in rules, adding in rounds, adding in gloves. I think before it was really the wild, wild west, and then reaching out, making all these partnerships and making it possible for fighters to earn more and more money. And I know that's an ongoing debate, but the bottom line is he's taken this sport to this massive platform where I believe it's on its way to being one of the most, if not the most popular sport on the planet. So I have massive respect for what he's done for the sport, for the fighters, for everybody. And I just can't wait to see how this company and everything continues to grow. Last but not least is Ariel Helwani. He is, I think, considered by pretty much everybody in the field as the #1 journalist in the MMA world. I am such a fan of Ariel because he's been there since the beginning. I think he's probably my favorite interviewer, period. I think he asks really interesting questions. I think he's truly fascinated by the sport and the fighters and their lives, and that comes out in his interviews. And he tells the other side of the story. I know Joe Rogan does as well, but to me, it's 50% of what's amazing about the sport are the actual competitions of who can beat who. But the other side, the other 50% that in my opinion is equally fascinating is how these guys think, because they're so interesting. What's going on in their lives? What got them there? What are they dealing with, struggling with, all these things, and then talking to them after a win, talking to them after a loss, all these things. And that's what Ariel brings to the table. And the other thing that I admire so much about Ariel is he stuck to his guns, for better, for worse. Things have happened in his career trajectory that have probably been super difficult to deal with. And I think it stems in general from that idea he has a certain set of guidelines and morals that he is unwilling to bend. And I think all of that in combination with his incredible journalistic skills make him an absolute pillar of the sport, in my opinion, and probably one of the people that is most responsible after, I'd say, probably Dana White and Joe Rogan in terms of propelling the growth and love of this sport. Reason number 4, the sport is all about personal development and triumph over great physical and mental obstacles. So when you think about what these guys go through, especially me as an entrepreneur who I always have to deal with my own battles and my own fights and so on and so forth. When you think about what these guys go through, each and every fight, they're facing probably the biggest fear in the world, which is the fear of massive injury or even potentially death. And they have to get their minds in that place. They also have to get their bodies, their physical structures as pristine as possible. They have to go through these crazy weight cuts. They have to be super flexible. You have to be in great cardiovascular shape. So when you break it down, what's amazing to me about this sport is all of these things that these guys have to go through it and how they go through it, going through things that most of us probably can't do. And we're going to talk more about how these athletes are essentially superheroes, in my opinion. But going through that and hearing about these personal development journeys, I think is so inspiring. And that's why I always like to listen to as many fighter interviews as possible, because you always glean interesting nuggets. I remember one recent nugget that I heard one of the fighters talking about confidence. And this was Chase Hooper. He's a young fighter, and Ariel was asking about confidence and how he probably has a good level of confidence. And he just threw out this little tidbit of, hey, confidence is something that it's not hey, you get there and then it just holds steady. You have to keep feeding it. You have to keep building it. You have to keep reinforcing it with good work, great effort, etc. So these types of things you're always gleaning from these athletes. A lot of them are quite young, but they have amazing insights, I think, because of how difficult and taxing this profession is. Rule number 5, MMA can be understood by anyone, even if it's your first time watching, because everyone understands a fight. I remember when Khabib had his last fight against Justin Gaethje, and I didn't even know it was his last fight. Nobody did, but it was during the daytime in the US, and I invited my best friend to come watch the fight. And he's not really a big fan, doesn't know much about it. So he sat down, he said, okay, I'll watch this with you, but I don't really understand the sport. I don't really understand what's going on, so you're gonna have to help me. I'm like, oh, but you do. You do, because you can look at it right away, and it's two guys going toe to toe. Even if you don't know the particular names of the submission attempts or the strikes or things like that, you can figure out what's going on. And once you get a tiny snippet of the narratives of the individual fighters, their stories, their backgrounds, their goals, I think it can immediately become very, very interesting and engaging for anybody. Reason number 6, fighters are the coolest and most interesting people on the planet, and their personal stories enrich the entire sport. So this is a very athlete-focused sport. And by the way, I'm not the best to compare it against other sports, because I think me, like a lot of other folks, who are really big fans of mixed martial arts, we're not really sports fans of other sports. I could say I play fantasy football. I grew up playing tennis, and I did for some periods of time follow the NBA, but this to me is a whole nother thing, a whole nother entity. And I'm such a fan of this sport. And the big part of the reason why is because I just think the fighters, they're so fascinating, they're so interesting. They have to have their minds in the right place. They have to be morally sound. They have to be very disciplined in terms of both their fitness regimens as well as diet regimens. So I think that you have all these really, really cool people from different places, parts of the world, but they all have these common mindsets, and they're just incredible people. And the other thing is just to, again, as I mentioned before, to be able to cross that barrier and go into a cage and fight for your life. It takes a special person, it takes a special individual. So to me, I love these guys, I love the fighters, and I love hearing their stories, and that just makes the sport incredible. Reason number 7, MMA is a truly international sport with fighting styles unique to certain regions, and it almost reminds me of Game of Thrones. I mean, you have the folks from the north of Russia coming down with this amazing style that is really heavy into grappling, and then you have phenomenal strikers coming out of different regions of Europe. You have jiu-jitsu masters coming out of Brazil having that skill set. So while everybody is learning together, and probably the sport will continue to get more homogenous in terms of what people train and what is proven to be the best forms of martial arts in general, but you do see this really cool international element that almost splits up the styles that you're coming with. Hey, is this Dagestani wrestle heavy style going to beat this really intense striking style? I mean, it's just such a fascinating question for each and every fight. So I love that international element to it, and I love that you have fighters coming from all these different places. Sometimes they can't speak English, and we're hearing them through a translator, but you can still glean their personality, and then someone will learn English so they can communicate, and then you get to see a different side. I mean, the whole thing is super cool, but I love that international element. Number 8, regardless of the outcome, you always walk away from a fight giving respect to both fighters because there is no home team. I think that's so cool in the sense, like, you might have a fighter from your region or from your city or state maybe that you root for because of that commonality. But in general, I think we can choose the fighters to root for even in the moment that maybe we like, that we share some commonalities, even just personality wise. But even after the fight, even if they're to lose, you look at that fight and be like, man, as long as it's like an awesome fight, well fought fight, no issues with judging, things like that, you can walk away just being so appreciative of this incredible contest. And sometimes you might even switch in the midst of it, be like, man, I wasn't such a fan of Leon Edwards maybe before. I mean, I'm just saying hypothetically, and then you walk away being like, man, that was an incredible fight, incredible post-fight interview. I'm a fan. And these types of things I feel happen pretty much only maybe in MMA, maybe a few other sports, versus in other ways, you're never like, hey, my home team lost, I give respect to the other side. People kind of feel bummed out. And I think in this sport, because of what these guys put on the line, and because of the fact that you really get to see their personalities, not just their team jersey or something like that, you can walk away always being like, man, that was incredible. Hey, maybe I was kind of hoping the other guy would win, but I can really appreciate that this guy stepped it up and had an amazing performance. Reason number 9, fighters have to be extremely tuned into diet and fitness, and it's fascinating and informative to hear how they optimize their health. So for somebody like me, I'm 42, I have a business that keeps me really busy. I'm always trying to stay in as best shape as possible, within reason, of course. And I love that piece of this sport where you're hearing these guys talking about all the things that they're having to do in terms of keeping themselves healthy, flexible, in shape, on weight. And they talk about it a lot in these interviews. And I'm always learning, I'm always gleaning something interesting and useful that I can apply to my life. So I think that, again, is probably a unique piece to mixed martial arts in a lot of these interviews that Ariel Helwani or other folks will do. And I love that piece. Anybody, I think, who's striving for self-improvement, self-development in these areas can learn a lot from these fighters. And finally, reason number 10, fighters are the ultimate athletes across all sports. So what I kind of mean by that is I think that when we go back to talk about this idea of fighting being the ultimate form of competition, and then you look at all the fighters, well, if you take them and put them against anybody else in any sport in this one ultimate form of competition. Again, that could be subjective or arbitrary, some people might say, but to me, I think it's pretty clearly defined. These guys are the ones that will come out triumphant across all athletes. If you were in a dangerous situation and you had the choice between a football player, a basketball player, or an MMA fighter, you would choose the MMA fighter. They are the ultimate in that sense. They are the ultimate protectors. And so I don't know how you can look at these guys and not have just a tremendous amount of respect for them and not want to watch them. So to me, this notion of MMA fighters being literally the toughest people on the planet, it just makes it all that more interesting and amazing of a sport. So there you have it. There are your 10 reasons why MMA is the best sport on the planet. If you like this video, make sure to click that like button. And if you want to see more from me and Justin, make sure to click subscribe. Thank you guys so much for joining, and I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.